This is what I hope is the most intriguing part of the discussion this afternoon, where you have an opportunity to interact with our panel here and try to drill down a little bit, maybe in some of the areas that they discussed. I'm sure there'll be some interaction between them as well that might help to clarify some of the data or some of the information you heard so far. I hope you've enjoyed the program. Again, I want to thank John Battles and all of our staff at the International Code Council for pulling this event together. I especially want to thank the panelists who took time out of their schedules at their own expense, I might add, to come and share this information with you. So on behalf of the Code Council, thank you very much for your time and commitment. Let me just reintroduce them real quick. John DeBlock with the National Weather Service, Alan Boswell, building official, City of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Sam Hensen with Simpson Strong Tie, Butch Grimes with Grimes Architects, John Vanderlint, PhD with the University of Alabama. And I want to also introduce a gentleman I mentioned this morning, James Crawford, a team leader with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association, part of the Department of Homeland Security. So these gentlemen are here to answer your questions. If you wouldn't mind using the mic, just introduce yourself and pose your question for the panel. So who's going to be the first brave individual to ask a question? If not, I'm going to put Mel Cosgrove on the spot. Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Plott with Wells Fargo Insurance here in Tuscaloosa. Just a couple of questions. I just mentioned earlier that I am $1 million price here on the Governor's Bentley's commission force that he created. Really want to do it before April when the tornado hit. Did a campaign promise when he was in sixth place of a six-man race governor race 2 years ago, and when he was down in Baldwin County speaking to a group of, I think it was really a group of Tea Party people, and say, Governor, our problem down here is high insurance rates. Either we can't get it or we can't afford it. And the governor, Bentley said, well, if you elect me, I promise you I'll call a special session and we'll get this solved. Well, lo and behold, the guy won. And second week on the job, they brought a whole busload of people up to Montgomery, knocked on his door, and said, "You remember us?" I said, "Yes, I do remember you." And so, anyway, before he calls a special session, he formed a group to try to come up with some solution of finding ways that we can help insurance companies to be more eager to come to Alabama and write insurance along the coast. And then April 27th hit, and then now it's getting to be a problem up here. We just got finished doing a listening tour around the state, 5 locations. From Mobile, we had 750 people attended. All was very mad. All the way up to Gunnersville, a lot of us chicken farmers that cannot get building insurance for the chicken houses, to up to Decatur just last week. And they're all having the same problem. Their homeowners are either going up or houses now being like Alpha is, and not picking on them, but they're one of several companies are now saying, yeah, if your house is over 15 years old, we're probably not going to insure you. That's we got everything else. So it's getting to be a problem up north. My question is to you is, we're going to start meeting in a couple of weeks of trying to find some solutions. I'm not smart enough. I have yet to figure out how insurance companies can make a better profit and lower their premiums down to help people on the coast. The only thing I can think of is we've got to build stronger buildings. But you go back and you try to get something statewide building codes or city change their building codes to make stronger buildings. Bottom line, I think that's what it's going to take. With that, how can we help with our elected officials? Because I know y'all working with the city of municipalities, y'all hearing it from the home builders, and also probably hearing from bankers and mortgage that, wait a minute, this is going to drive the cost way up, and therefore people can't buy houses. What can we do to get the officials to start thinking more about updating their building codes?
Who wants to tackle? Who wants to be the first brave man?
I'd like to answer that.
Go ahead, Alan.
And this is something that everybody needs to think about. By human nature, we don't like change. And especially when you don't know something or understand something, you're certainly not going to change something in your life. The biggest thing that I see that you can do, education is the greatest opportunity to get the word out, teach everybody, make them understand why these changes need to come about. Why do we need to use this type systems in these houses for winds to make them stronger, to tie down? Why is this costing me an extra $3,000 or so? I'm just using those for example. People don't want to just pay an extra $1,000 or $2,000, whatever it is, for that, whatever the ratio and chances is of this ever happening. I agree the stronger building should be there, but you've got to educate people. When you educate people, the market drives that. People demand it and they want it. And it makes the codes go in the codes and makes the codes a lot easier to enforce that way. You're also going to have opposing sides. And to go back to their insurance argument, I know this all started with Katrina because I've been in some of the meetings in Montgomery there. A lot of these insurance companies collected money and premiums for 30 and 40 years on these buildings that were built 30 and 40 years ago on the coast. And when they had these massive claims, they said, oh, we got to do something different. But they didn't have a problem collecting premiums. So, there's got to be a little give and take here on that. But education, in my mind, is the way you educate the public and you create that demand in the public. This is what we want, because that takes the politics out of it.
Can I add to that real quick?
Yes, please.
From the insurance industry's perspective, is it possible to offer reductions in premiums if the homeowner so choose to strengthen their structure beyond what code is? And so maybe they spent those extra dollars to strengthen their structure, but would they be able to see some of that in reduced premiums for them? So the insurance industry is going to have reduced risk or exposure to the structure being damaged in those events. They should offer some of that back. And then that may drive some of this demand to build better and strengthen those. So that it would also in turn, cause that cycle of reducing your risk in the insurance industry.
You can. I would think, again, I'm not an insurance company. I sell insurance, represent several companies. But the problem that we've been seeing is a couple things. One is, as far as getting credits, if you're paying $1,000, $2,000 homeowner premium, and you go spend $5,000 of getting, like those things you show up in South Carolina, when you go change your roof, and you anchor down your, yank it down from your slab to your walls to your ceiling, and you do all that, well, you get, say, a 15 or 20% credit. That's not saving you a lot of money. But what I think we need to see is, okay, if you do that, and you come to me and say, hey, I did all this, I'd like to get a credit, it's okay. Well, who did the work? Was it somebody that knew how to put all this together, they're trained to do that? I think if we can get that, you have more insurance company willing to give credits for that.
So verifiable compliance, if you will. Dr. Vanderlint, did you want to
Yeah,
get
I was
in on
just
this?
going to comment. I think, I spoke with some of the researchers, I think Rose Grant at State Farm and others who do some work in this, and they, one of the big issues for them is that they don't, from an engineering perspective, is my understanding is they don't have mechanistic models, so they work with data. They work with data that they gather from these events, but they don't necessarily. They project, but they project with a statistical model. So if you change something physically within the building, they can't tell exactly how those numbers will change. They can use something like HAZUS from FEMA. They can do things like that, and so it's really the way I see it is if the insurance industry, if they can begin to partner with people that develop models like that and work with them, and they have their own people as well, but if they can begin to partner with researchers or hire modelers that can do that and can say, well, what's going to happen to this building if there is another Katrina? What exactly is going to occur? And then they can project forward in time, because right now they're they're really reactive and not proactive.
Any other comments? Thank you very much for the question. Next question. Yes, please.
I'm Don Price, and along with Jeff, I serve on the Governor's Homeowner Commission. I live in Montgomery, Alabama. I grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My sister lives here in Tuscaloosa, and she lost 2 houses, her own residence and a rental house where the young lady was killed that was a student at the University of Alabama. Assuming for the moment that around $2 billion of houses are going to be rebuilt before any changes are made in the building codes, which could very well be the case, is there some checklist that you and your groups could come up with so that people like my sister, who are going to be rebuilding or building new houses within the next year, that they could sit down with their builder and say, and have a list of things that they could consciously make a decision about whether to do or not do. Right? They're not builders. They don't know anything about home construction. But having a checklist of things that they could voluntarily decide to do, forgetting insurance for the moment, and what each one of those things would do for them. I think that would be very helpful for them. And I don't know if such a checklist that's written in a language
English.
yeah, not a language that a building code person can use or a contractor can use, but just a plain regular citizen would understand.
Don,
Does that
that's a
exist?
very good question. I'm going to ask Sam maybe to go first.
Yeah, it's thank you for the great lead in there, by the way, because that's something that Simpson Strong Tie has been actively working on the last couple of weeks. So after we were part of the damage assessment team, we see a real need for people to understand, what can I do to strengthen my structure just real time. When I go into Home Depot and look at these types of products, well, what can I tell my builder? I want this there to strengthen it. And so we have a very concise piece of literature that is in the works right now, probably ready in the next 2 weeks or so, that gives you some introduction about tornado damage and then how to make your home more resilient, not tornado proof, but make it more resilient to these types of wind speeds. And then when you turn it open, there'll be a table that says, if you want to resist an EF0 tornado, and there'll be a wind speed there of 85 mile an hour, these are the connectors that you need to use to strengthen your house for uplift. And there'll be, very common connectors that are readily available. And it kind of walks you from top all the way to the bottom, how to anchor the sill plate down to the foundation, and just give you, really practical guidance there on how to strengthen that structure. So that'll be ready really, really shortly here.
Do you know in what fashion you're going to disseminate that information? Well, would my sister be able to be even aware? She's not here today, so would she even be aware that there's something like that coming out? Or when it comes out, would she know that it's out?
Yeah, that's a great question because, I think that Simpson doesn't necessarily have these discussions with homeowners or, people that own these types of structures. It's more so the builders, the building officials, engineers and designers, architects and so forth. And that's more the voice that, we speak to those types of people. However, we need to do something to make it more readily available to the homeowners. And so it is available online. We work directly with a lot of the big box stores like Home Depots and Lowe's, and that will be getting that literature out as well. But, probably a more national, this is what we would, present to everybody and get that out to homeowners as well is probably a good focus for us to look at.
I would think that maybe here in Tuscaloosa, if the mayor's office could make sure that there's some publicity on that, or maybe that could come through your building office.
And this is something that, I didn't mean to butt in, but this would be above and beyond the building code. So right now they're enforcing the building code, saying that these have to be done by code. At a minimum, you have to do this, and then this would be above that if you want to strengthen your structure even further. these are things that you can additionally put on.
Sam, just a question. So this is all done by calculation and things based on mechanics and calculation and things. So it's obviously very good, but I guess at the same time there would be a disclaimer and things because obviously it wasn't. I mean, how does that work? How does that work?
Yeah, great question, John. And so the literature piece that we're working on is much like a prescriptive document like the building code. So it has to take a stance, because it can't be open-ended. It has to take a stance that says if your building falls in this criteria, if your roof pitch is 6 and 12 to 12 and 12, if you're 40 foot or less roof span, if you're 60 by 40, if you're less than 30 foot tall for your building, and then it gives you guidance that these are the measures that we took in place to calculate those wind loads on these types of buildings, where we took the hurricane wind speeds. And we didn't use these factors in place to reduce those wind speeds, because a lot of times when you design for wind pressures from hurricanes, you account for those wind speeds being reduced if there's trees or multiple buildings around there. As John talked about straight line winds, those things, if they pass over a large area, they get slowed down when there's buildings or things in the way. But if you're a tornado, it's more localized. You're going through that one neighborhood. What did the house across the street really do to slow down that wind speed of the house right there? It didn't do anything necessarily. And so you can't take those reduction factors for those things. And so this document that we're preparing says those things, that we didn't reduce the wind speeds for those. It's the actual wind speed. So the 130 that's in this document that we're preparing would be more indicative of about a 150 hurricane-prone wind speed. And so it's giving you guidance and disclaimers, and they're saying that this is addressing the uplift loads and those things, but I think it's done in a way that homeowners could actually use this as well.
James, did you want to jump in?
I did. FEMA, I represent the hazard mitigation team here on this disaster, and FEMA has a number of publications that, from building professionals, co-professionals to average citizens, as you mentioned, could benefit from. There are the coastal construction publications that have fact sheets with illustrations introducing these concepts. There are the wind retrofit guide, and today available are the tornado recovery advisories that touch upon the continuous load path and various other things that a homeowner could do to strengthen their structures, to implement safe rooms, and some of the other things that you heard about today. So there are a variety of publications available at FEMA.gov that can be ordered for free and downloaded as well, that will cover a lot of these concepts so that, as you mentioned, average citizens can benefit and begin the discussions with their builders. They may not want to enter into the highly technical aspects that we talked about with respect to the wind speed and the specific loading. Maybe your sister isn't prepared to do that, but this will introduce the concept so that the reasons that you mentioned for why these things are worthwhile can become clear, and that will begin hopefully a groundswell of interest in trying to break the chain so that you don't have structures failing unnecessarily, creating windborne debris that then in turn damage other structures. So there are a number of resources available for average citizens as well as building professionals.
Any other comments?
I'll just make one more comment. I mean, one way to do it also is to be sure and hire a licensed engineer to take a look at it rather than just do it as, to take a look at the design of the building, and they can essentially enhance it rather than just do a kind of conventional construction practice. It costs more, but that's one way to assure, or at least assure that it's calculated.
Grady?
Yeah, what I'd like to say is we're looking at probably three things. One is prescriptive, like Simpson is going to give you use a model number XYZ. There's also the true design where you bring in the engineer or an architect and you design for that specific instance. That's usually larger buildings, so most people can't or don't put that kind of effort into just into a residence. But the third thing that bothers me about all of this is we've got to verify it. If the contractor doesn't know what he's doing or is not a good person and doesn't take care of things, you're still going to get a building that blows away and you won't know it until it's too late. So somewhere in there's got to be a verification.
Thank you, Butch. Two points that I'd note, and perhaps collectively, we could package some of this information in a simplified way. But Sam, I think you mentioned it in your presentation, the IBHS Fortified program might be the type of solution that you're looking for. And also, the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes has a blueprint for safety, which I think is that type of checklist, things you could do beyond code. Before I go to the next question, I know Mel Cosgrove had a couple of announcements. Mel, did you want to make those announcements now?
First, let me say that I think, and Alan, you backed up, at a meeting you and I both attended recently, there was a gentleman representing the independent insurers that gave us out a brochure, a booklet, and I think it was from IBHS that talked about all the stuff that he was talking about to help on the fortified buildings and all. It was a pretty interesting booklet.
But as a regular consumer,
Yes, it was designed. It was designed for you to.
I'm holding a comment for you later, and I want everybody to hear that. I'm sorry, Don.
No, that's okay. Go ahead, Mel.
Well, I'm Mel Cosgrove with ICC staff, and I represent our chapters. We have a number of chapters in Alabama, code official chapters, and they have asked me to make a couple of announcements for you. As we speak right now, there is the governor's, or the state of Alabama's Building Code Council is meeting, and they are finalizing the adoption of a statewide residential code for the state of Alabama, as well as a statewide energy conservation code, and with amendments. And because of that, in April, one of our chapters, which is the Alabama Plumbing, Gas, Mechanical Inspectors Association, they're having their annual conference in Auburn next April 2012, and they're going to bring in instructors that will teach classes on the new energy conservation code with Alabama amendments, which may be of interest to you. Then the next month in May, the Code Officials Association of Alabama is having their annual conference at Gunnersville State Park. And this conference, I think, really fits in with this meeting. Their main educational program is going to be a 2-day educational program that ICC is going to teach for them, and it's going to be called When Disaster Strikes, an Institution for Disaster Response. And it's a 2-day seminar. It will provide the skills, knowledge, and tools to become a disaster response inspector, and you will learn how to interface with incident command structures and learn how to identify unsafe buildings and uninhabitable structures. So that's going to be the COAA conference next year in May at Gunnersville. So y'all may be very much interested in attending that, both the AAPGMI and the COAA conference. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Mel. I appreciate that. Okay, next question for our panel. Yes, please.
My name is Michael Kingsmore. I'm a structural engineer. I've been designing commercial and residential structures for about 15 years. I appreciate the comment about not making knee-jerk reactions and doing quick changes. As a structural engineer, not only do we have to keep up with building code changes, but we've got to keep up with concrete design code changes, steel design code changes, wind design code changes. I mean, we've got a lot of codes that the building code references that we use to design structures by. I would just like to say, and I'm not trying to be a code basher here. I just kind of want to put out a little bit of extra information, but I would like to say that education is a good point as well. Mr. Boswell, I appreciate you bringing that up. The video that Mr. Hensen showed between the fortified structure and the non-fortified structure was very compelling to me. When I design residential structures, they never come out the same way as a prescriptive design. Okay, the load path is always, you know, I'm using clips, I'm using anchorage that always exceeds the prescriptive design. And I think by either somebody hiring a structural engineer or just educating the general public. If we could get HGTV to show that video that Mr. Hensen showed, I think the consumers would say, that's the house that I want. You know, if they saw that video, regardless of whether it meets code or not, the fact that it exceeds code, they would say, that's the house that I want. I'm going to spend $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 extra for that house. And some of them still might put in a storm shelter as well. So I guess from the consulting engineer side, I'd almost request that we don't just jump to changing codes. We get into the education side of it. And I would also ask the panel to maybe comment on Chapter 17 of the IBC, which is the special inspections. I find that a lot of times I'll get into jurisdictions that don't enforce Chapter 17. And so on residential and even commercial structures, we don't have any inspection going on. Third-party, audits, or somebody coming in and looking at outside of the building code official. We don't have anybody that's coming in and really doing a thorough inspection on the work that's going on. So I guess my question would be, what are your thoughts on just taking the code we have and sort of implementing some of the stuff that's in there, especially Chapter 17?
So if I could just paraphrase, it's how do we drive public awareness to create a market demand?
That would be one, and
Right.
then the other is, take the code that we've got and
enforce it.
actually start enforcing it a little bit more.
Who wants to take that one?
I want to answer to some of that.
That was a softball right there.
Wonder why. I agree with him on a lot of things. There's some points I want to make, and if you asked a developer or a builder today if he built something by the code and asked it to give it to grade, and he met the code, he would say he should get an A on it. From the code inspection side of that, or how we look at it, is if you've done everything the bare minimum what the code requires, I would give you a D. That's what the code tells me. If I meet the bare minimum that's required, you got a D on your structure. Now, if I want to make a C or a B or an A on this thing, you go beyond the code, add other things, upgrade your energy conservation on that. I mean, conserving energy, there's things you can do. You can use a higher resistant value insulation on this. You can use the hurricane straps for 135-mile-an-hour winds. When you're in a 90-mile-an-hour wind, you're going to have a better structure. It's a market-driven item. It's education. That's where I wanted to go with you. Everybody needs to know, because something that's built to code don't mean it gets an A. It's met the minimum that has been required. That's the point I'm trying to make to everybody about education. Your sister's going to be in better shape, because if she hires a design professional, she can say, I want a better than built house to code. I want better things. It's the way we live our life. Everybody don't buy Volkswagens. We're all different. Some of us upgrade, some buy less. But in the building codes, minimum to us in the code profession means you get a D grade. To a builder, if I build by code, his thinking is, I get an A. We got to come down together and get on the same page on that part.
So we have a little bit of a disconnect.
Right.
And the
There's a little
public's
bit of
probably just as
disconnect when a builder
disconnected.
says he builds to code, and when code enforcement says, well, you met minimum, you passed, you got a D. If you don't meet minimum, you fail.
Any other thoughts on that?
Just make a comment. I agree completely, and I think we saw that after Katrina going along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, they're really the exact same thing in actually talking with homeowners, and they were shocked. They weren't even right on the coast, some of them, and they were shocked that their houses, the roofs had come off, and the wind-driven rainwater damage, was on the order of half the cost or more of the house, things like that. But what we've always noted in my earthquake work particularly, we've always noted is that something called performance-based seismic design, in this case it would just be performance-based wind engineering or something like that. Really what we've got is, for a homeowner, the first thing that a homeowner considers is they take the structural system and the components and cladding and things like that, and they say that gets designed to the absolute bare minimum, which is code. And then they say, okay, now how do I want to improve my house? Well, I want granite countertops, I want tile, I want all sorts of nice things. I'm going to spend the money on that, and I'm going to throw that into the financing. So take just a couple of % of that, put it into the wind resistance, and maybe you have linoleum in one of the bathrooms in the back. And that's really what needs to happen. So I think I come back to education as well.
John DeBlock, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're in the public awareness business, right?
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
Public response is a great problem. Education and response. As we see the sociological response to warnings, people have fatalistic attitudes. If it's my time, it's my time. It's a great challenge to get people educated and get them to perform. In your case, to go out and pursue those better safety measures. And for us, it's getting them to respond to the warning and go to shelter. Very similar parallels.
James, hate to do this to you too, but again, FEMA is in the public awareness business. Do any thoughts come to mind? How we could close that gap?
FEMA spends a considerable amount of time in response to the disasters and in general with a community education and outreach component. So the publications, individuals such as myself, engineers and architects that will come out and try and educate the public, try and raise the awareness. I'm in agreement that the codes are the minimums, and it's an effort to communicate to the public that that's where you start and there's more to be done. Increasing awareness is a big part of what we do. So we have the publications and individuals to attend functions like this to help spread the word. So, and it is complacency with alerts is an issue. People don't always heed warnings because of test schedules and different things that make them desensitized. So it is very important to communicate that awareness and preparedness are just as important as the code aspects. Having somewhere safe to go, if you don't have a plan, won't help you. You need to be prepared with respect to how to respond, also with where to respond.
John, I was just going to ask you, John, I bet if we got Nick Saban to cut a PSA, people would listen. What do you, could you work on that for us?
Yeah, I'll absolutely do my best. One thing though I want to bring up, and this is coming back to the simple granite countertop issue, or example. The builders offer that, but that's offered because they can sell it, they can make a good profit on it, but they don't offer a structural upgrade package. There isn't a package A, B, and C, because if you think about it, who's going to say, well, it's only my family in there, I'll take the C package. They're not going to
sell something when you can't see it.
Exactly, they can't see it. It's not polished. Now, if you had a plexiglass, and it showed the plot of what would happen to the house in, say, 100-mile-an-hour wind for each of the systems, and you had to walk by that every day on your way to bed, you might feel differently. And I know that's a harsh example, but how, so how it's somehow enabling, or well, I think they're enabled, but it's somehow getting the builders to offer structural upgrade packages. That's really the only way, because the public's not going to buy something that A, they can't see, and something that's not even offered.
I'll just add two things to that, and then I also wanted to go back to your question about inspection too. So, but I've heard this put a couple of different ways. One right now, code is legally the worst way that we can build our house, right? So we have to do better than code. So when the builders think that I got an A on my building because I met code, I build the code, that just tells me, yes, okay, you legally built your house to code. And another way that I've heard this, kind of relating houses back to cars and airbags. If you had a car without airbags and a car right next to it with airbags in it, and the salesman was trying to sell each one of those cars, would you pay $1,500 less for that car that didn't have airbags? Or would you buy the car that had airbags in it for $1,500 more? Right now everybody's car has airbags, and we don't see those things, yet we expect them to be there. And that was just, 15 years ago that we didn't have airbags in our car. We need to change our mentality about homes and think that these things need to be strengthened. We need to have these things in them, just like we do with cars nowadays with airbags in it. And then, we do need to get back to his question about inspection. And, with residential structures that are built prescriptively to the IRC, what do we do for structural inspection? We inspect plumbing and electrical, and those things are very important, and we look at those, but do we look at structural in the prescriptive areas as far as inspections? Is that something that we look at? Is that something that we should increase? Because I don't think in the IRC that we do that. Is that something that we should increase our awareness of?
What does it cost to inspect a house? Does anybody know? Like, what's the, just a guesstimate?
That varies from place to place.
I mean, say here, what would you say, like just a ballpark?
What is the permit fee?
Is it a fair?
Yeah, that's all covered in your permit fee. at the
Okay.
time.
Okay.
There may be multiple inspections. 2 points I wanted to make
Go
based
ahead,
on some
Al.
things that they had said. I agree about the airbags in the cars. I just think that we are 10 or 15 years away from actually, or less, of having structures built, especially in the IRC and other buildings, designed under these tornado wind loads. I think the awareness has been there. I think it's going to be there sooner than we think. Everything has its time. But what I wanted to say was, people have short memories. Once something passes and out of the way, people don't think about it no more. And I guess the best way you can explain that is like, my mom always told me, it's like when you're having kids, when the kid is born, you don't remember the pain. I can't testify to that, but I've heard a lot of women say that. And when these disasters strike, they come and go, and we have short memory. We forget these things. Life goes on. And that's why we miss out on a lot of opportunities.
Excellent point. Next question from the audience. Yeah, please. Could you use the mic, though? Because they're giving me the sign back there. Thank you.
What Sam mentioned earlier, that you're talking about Joplin, Missouri, that they have gone in and already started upgrading the wind code.
That's correct. So they've already made amendments to their code. The building official there has adopted changes where they're requiring anchor bolts spaced much closer with square plate washers, and they're requiring continuous load path with positive connections there to resist those loads. So that's already implemented. So right after the tornado went through, there was a moratorium on building, and I think they're just now allowing permits to go again. So those things are implemented there in that area right now.
Okay. Is City of Tuscaloosa, if they're looking, I know they've been in partnership with Joplin, they've been conference back and forth, a learning experience.
City of Tuscaloosa will be looking at some things. I can't say exactly what. Recommendation hasn't been finished and sent to the mayor yet, but I'm sure that they are going to be looking at some changes, and one of them I could probably say is probably some safe rooms or safe areas. There are some concerns about that. Highly more interested in protecting life than I am saving the building right now, and that's my mission.
I'm going to ask, can I ask a FEMA question?
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, you were asking earlier about giving credits if somebody fix their home up a little bit, make it a little bit stronger. The state don't have money, insurance. If you give a little credit, the homeowner's not paying a lot of premium, so it's not going to be enough credit to encourage that homeowners to mitigate their houses. The only body in this country can print money is the federal government. And I think it would be cheaper, instead of using the Air Force One policy, which I know what that is, don't you? After a catastrophe happened, Air Force One flies in, President gets out and says, FEMA's going to come in, we're going to dump $300 million to your area. Would it be cheaper if the federal government would help and give tax credits for doing these mitigation on houses, and if they do build stronger houses? Because they're coming in now, in the city of Tuscaloosa, I guess it's statewide, they're paying 80% of all this cleanup. So if we started this 20 years ago of doing this program, it'd probably come out cheaper If,
It's sort of like moving the houses out of the floodways, you
Yeah.
know.
Can't speak to tax credit issues, but there is a hazard mitigation grant program through which the state, as the applicant to FEMA, can support different efforts by homeowners for safe rooms and other things that would serve to mitigate the loss from natural hazards. So the hazard mitigation grant program is available for that purpose. And so in the state, I think the deadline has been extended to October 27th for homeowners to put in a request for up to $4,000 to cover the cost of having a FEMA compliant safe room installed in their home. So there is that. The other one, I think there's a different government agency dealing with tax credits, not FEMA. But certainly there are other programs along those lines that provide opportunities and incentives for average citizens to improve or make mitigations to their homes and their communities. So that is currently what's available and what I can speak to.
You know, James, if you look at the model for the energy conservation, there are tax credits for energy conservation. There are people being trained currently to teach electricians how to put photovoltaic equipment on roofs. Maybe this is something that the governor's committee might request that FEMA or some federal agency get involved in upgrading this area.
A mitigation assessment team through in conjunction with the Building Science Organization, we have put on different training courses for building officials covering some of the concepts that were discussed today, specifically about safe rooms. So we do have that outreach for training to teach professionals these concepts to increase the awareness as well. So
I went to Birmingham 2 weeks ago.
Right.
But yes, the problem I see though is that there were 100 people probably in the class I took, and we probably should have had 2,000 people in that class.
Right. I think that was the second round of those courses, actually. We did 2 sessions, and it's based on demand. We put out a notification, try and make sure that the public is aware. But you're right, it would be better to have more attendance and increase the number of people able to go out and implement these techniques. We would continue to try and improve that effort.
Yeah.
Next question. Pretty quiet group. Go ahead, Michael.
We've been talking mostly about residential structures and people's homes. What about on the commercial side? Do you guys see any changes necessary on the commercial side for businesses and larger buildings like Hobby Lobby or some of these other buildings? I know, Mr. Boswell, you said that you guys weren't going to allow metal buildings on the main thoroughfares now. So
Let me clarify that.
okay, I'm sorry.
That is a zoning issue, not a building code issue.
Okay.
I want to make sure that that's what type of buildings be allowed back in a certain area.
Okay.
Yeah, we're still going to allow engineered Butler buildings and things in Tuscaloosa. It just may not be in one of those areas, so it becomes a zoning issue now.
Okay. Do you guys see any change? I mean, most of the changes we've been talking about are related to, the housing side. Do you guys see any changes on the commercial building side?
For me, most of our commercial buildings, and Tuscaloosa is very lucky, like a lot of other large municipalities, most all their buildings are designed, there are state laws in place. Any buildings over 2,500 square feet have to be designed by a design professional. So, a lot of that's being looked at in that way. But one of the points I want to make about, there's still a lot of areas in this country, not just Alabama, that have no building departments, have no inspection departments. There's nobody to oversee any of the buildings in a lot of places in this country. So that's another thing you got to think about. There's still a lot of this country that's still rural. But for us in Tuscaloosa, I don't see a change in our building code other than pursuing the latest 2012 that just came out.
John, I'm sorry, go ahead, Al.
I'm through.
John, you mentioned ASCE 7, the next update. Are there any anticipated changes other than the ones you've mentioned that would impact commercial construction?
For ASCE 7, there's nothing that I'm aware of related to tornadoes. You know, obviously the wind code itself within ASCE 7 is constantly getting updated. There's a huge change from 05 to 2010, which I think you're aware of, and then it doubled in thickness, I believe, as well. So, I don't think in the 2015 it's just getting started a little more, but I don't think it's going to be as substantial. There may be, as I mentioned, a tsunami chapter ready by that time, but I don't think there'll be a tornado chapter because that hasn't started yet.
I will throw out a question for the panel, just following up a little bit on Michael's question about commercial. I hear this almost everywhere I travel throughout the country in these types of discussions, and that is the issue of retrofitting. If you consider that 60% of all the buildings that are ever going to be built have already been built, what is the panel's thought about retrofitting? Are there any practical solutions to retrofit homes or commercial buildings for tornado resistance?
I think for homes, there definitely is. I guess commercial buildings, I'll pass to somebody else on the panel, but for homes, and maybe Sam can speak to that a little more. I mean, you know, there's a fair number of products, like Simpson products and other manufacturers that can be put in and to get a continuous load path. And, you know, I'd say it's certainly, at least, I don't know, maybe you would know, Sam, but 3-4 times more expensive than when it's new construction. I don't know if you have an estimate for that, but it's substantially more expensive because you do have to take some drywall out, do things like that. But if a homeowner is serious about it, it's not a bad way to go.
Yeah, retrofitting adds a whole new level of cost and challenges to, increasing the resilience of the structure to these types of things. And we're looking at new technologies on how to provide retrofit solutions, maybe using more fasteners, things that don't require you to open up as much of the wall cavity. Can we go through the roof sheathing, the roof decking, through the roof framing and into the top plate of the wall with a long fastener, and then from the wall stud to the wall top plates, maybe some kind of fasteners there, and then down to the bottom and so forth. So we're investigating those types of things, but it definitely opens up more of a challenge when you have retrofit applications. You do have to open up the walls, which adds more cost and so forth.
And I want to thank the audience for your participation and hope that you got, again, as much out of this as I did. I want to, again, sincerely thank the panel for taking the time to share the information with us. And with that, we'll close this year's Tornado Symposium. Thank you very much.